The word generic is thrown around a lot in the world of video games. It's attached to products that don't innovate or that copy the work of others to follow a trend, usually in an environment that's already overly saturated by the competition. It's something that's not unique or its own thing, and the ever popular first-person shooter has its fair share of installments that hold the informal title. Ever since they begun as one of the founding fathers of modern gaming, FPS games have been one of the most prominent genres in the industry, and one where the player base is constantly being vied for by developers and publishers trying to release the next big thing. Popularized by the release of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, the big FPS trend of the 7th console generation was the modern military shooter, a name given to any number of shooter games set in the modern era. Common elements to these games were simple or non-existent single-player stories, a washed-out colour palette featuring many shades of brown and grey, repetitive and straightforward levels, among a bevy of other uninspiring ideas. Because of Modern Warfare's overwhelming success, and also its subsequent yearly releases getting a similar level, every developer with aspirations of sky-high sales numbers wanted a piece of the pie, and so the race to make the best Modern Warfare knockoff was on. What followed was a staggering amount of modern military shooters that were put to the market. In the years around 2008 to 2012, it felt like we had a new one each week, some from developers you'd never heard of, and some from the biggest names in the industry. And it's these that I find so interesting. In 2010, Electronic Arts released the 13th game in the Medal of Honor series, creatively named Medal of Honor. Acting as a soft reboot, it put its traditional World War II setting to the side and set its sights on grasping some of Call of Duty's thunder. At this point in time, the genre was already becoming saturated enough for public perception to begin to shift. What was once a breath of fresh air in 2007 from the oversaturation of World War II shooters now started to seem similarly overdone and excessive. Despite generally positive reviews and actually being a commercial success, I didn't actually play Medal of Honor when it came out. To me, it just seemed boring, and speaking to others I know, I wasn't the only one with the sentiment. Going back and playing it now, it undeniably feels like your bog standard early 2010s war shooter, complete with everything you'd expect, such as gruff men who swear and use military acronyms a lot, to lingering through mundane scripted events. To give some context to the amount of modern military shooters we were getting around this time, here's a list of just a few that were competing for space. Sniper Ghost Warrior, Arma 2 Operation Arrowhead, Battlefield Bad Company 2, Battlefield 3, Black Light Tango Down, Call of Duty Black Ops, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, Breach, Brink, Homefront, MAG, and 007 Legends, as well as many others. Something that bewilders me is the fact that EA released Medal of Honor only 7 months after the incredibly popular Battlefield Bad Company 2, and 1 month before Call of Duty Black Ops. It says a lot about the amount of these games we were getting at the time, and because of the cluttered release schedule, it was quickly overshadowed by the more popular offerings. And it seems EA didn't learn their lesson, as they released the sequel, Medal of Honor Warfighter, 2 years later, within weeks of the releases of both Call of Duty Black Ops 2 and Far Cry 3. It was both a critical and commercial failure, selling nearly half the copies of its 2010 predecessor and putting the entire franchise on hold until further notice. While I would definitely describe both of the modern Medal of Honor games as generic, being generic doesn't inherently make them bad games. While definitely uninspired, they're not complete write-offs. They do pack some good sound design, and the multiplayer was seemingly solid, although I had no luck trying to play it now, as it seems there's no one left in the world playing either games any longer. An example of a game that sounds generic on paper but succeeded despite it was the previously mentioned Battlefield Bad Company 2. Having the Battlefield name definitely helped it move some copies, but its back-of-the-box description of a squad-level, first-person shooter based in a contemporary modern warfare setting blah 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 isn't incredibly inspiring. Nonetheless, a quality single-player campaign, which has always been unusual in Battlefield, combined with satisfying and refined multiplayer, gained it a lot of popularity by fans, and it's one of my favourites in the Battlefield series. Now, let's fast forward to 2018. The shooter genre is definitely still a saturated one. I feel it's one where developers have been experimenting in it for a while, and know they need to make something exceptional in order to stand out. The gaming landscape is a lot different now than it was 5 years ago, and in a world where games like Fortnite and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds exists with popularity to a level that's rarely been seen, games now more than ever need to put in the work and distinguish themselves from the masses. Even mainstay shooters like Call of Duty and Battlefield now not only need to compete with other games in their genre, but they also contend with losing a lot of their more casual audience to games like the aforementioned Fortnite and PUBG, which not only have the gameplay to pull people in, but also have far lower barriers to entry. This is especially true in Fortnite's case, where the game is free, and players who have spent no money in the game can beat someone who's spent hundreds on cosmetics with skill alone. And you can see Battlefield's already starting to move into this new trend. By changing its model and dropping the premium pass, it's making all maps free, which helps to keep the player base unfragmented, which is incredibly important. In a gaming scene that has more and more people moving to other games all the time, developers need to do their best in keeping the player base together, as splitting it up just makes people less inclined to stick around. Contrary to Battlefield, Call of Duty seems incapable of dropping its payment model, and it already seemed archaic years ago, let alone now, charging players for new maps, walling them off to people who don't want to pay. But some games don't have the name of Battlefield or Call of Duty, names that will sell copies no matter what. Games trying to contend in a hyper-competitive genre like this just can't be pretty good anymore. They need to be outstanding. Or developers need to focus on one or two things and make sure they do them better than everyone else. And Battlestate Games' Escape from Tarkov is doing just that. If you haven't heard of Escape from Tarkov, I honestly don't blame you. It's a niche game that's currently unfinished, and it's only in the last year or so started to gain more widespread popularity. It's described as a hardcore and realistic online first-person action RPG simulator with MMO features, which is definitely a mishmash of genres but can be probably best matched to the moniker of a survival shooter, a tag that loosely describes many popular games over the past few years such as H1Z1 or the ever-present DayZ. Personally, I've never really been too keen on games in the survival genre. The only one I really played in it was the above mentioned DayZ back when it was a mod for Arma 2, and even then I wasn't that into it. It's for that reason why I was so surprised with my enjoyment when I first started playing Escape from Tarkov. While I was initially drawn to it through videos of its truly insane weapon modding, what's continued to keep me logging in is its incredibly satisfying gunplay and its loot system. And while a lot of people do call Tarkov a survival shooter, I'm not sure I really echo the statement. While technically yes you do survive, it's not a permadeath situation like most games in the genre. If you die, you lose any items that you take into a match with you, but there's a permanent player inventory outside games that holds your gear and it's not affected by your actions you take in a raid. There's also no health permanence, so if you successfully extract with a couple of broken legs, you'll be at full strength, fit and healthy, ready to go for the next one. When jumping into Tarkov, it's best to assume that you will die a lot. After playing shooters like Call of Duty, Battlefield, and to a lesser extent Rainbow Six for most of my life, getting into what is undeniably a hardcore FPS was much more of a learning curve than picking up your standard shooter. But once you're familiar with Tarkov's systems and mechanics, there's an extremely rewarding game to be had. The loot cycle is hands down the best I've experienced, and it's incredibly satisfying finding new gear in the world or taking it off other players, especially if you've bested them in PvP combat, which itself is some of the most intense I've found in any game. When in a lot of cases it only takes one shot to drop someone, a mistake can mean your death and the loss of everything on you, which makes for some really nail-biting firefights. While Escape from Tarkov's premise and the back of the box description won't win any awards for being unique, it shines as a prime example of a game that knows its audience and what they want, focusing in on specific aspects of gameplay and doing them better than everyone else. Gunplay, weapon modding, the loot cycle, they're all excellent and help the game stand out from a sea of similar ones that are constantly in competition with one another. Back in the time of Medal of Honor, it felt every shooter was trying to be the next big thing, or the COD killer. But the truth is that not every FPS can or needs to be a high-octane cinematic experience, and that's what the developers of Tarkov understand. They can carve out a niche in one of the most cutthroat genres out there, and do so with a game that in my opinion is not just a great FPS, it's the best I've played in years. Thanks for watching.